Thanks, Cahir. Look, first of all, I'd like to thank all the deputies, and I'm deputising for Minister Ryan, who all the deputies know is unavailable tonight. And I think it's clear that all deputies on all sides of the House are committed to improving transport infrastructure in both regional and rural Ireland, and nobody has a monopoly on their interest in this issue. And equally, I think it's clear to say that the government is committed to improving transport infrastructure across the country. And the commitment is evidenced in the National Planning Framework and in our rural future, and is also backed up in the funding allocated under the National Development Plan for the next 10 years and allocated under the Budget 2022 to Connecting Ireland in next year. But just taking up on one point from one of the previous speakers, sometimes projects do get delayed, and that is part of the planning process. And if either the Department of Transport or a minister or a local authority was to interfere in that, I'm sure some of the deputies that previously spoke would take issue then with the same government for a different reason. And we had, as all deputies will remember, tribunals in this House for different reasons. So planning processes are independent, and they are for good reason. We all agree that an improved transport system has an important role to play in promoting balanced regional development and enhancing rural connectivity, but is also crucially addressing climate change. And there's no dispute from any side of the House, let alone the government side, that these improvements need to be delivered. However, there are aspects of the motion that seem to wish away the best practice in terms of project delivery, and it is clearly the case that costings and schedules for projects are subject to uncertainty in the earlier stages of the development. The earlier stage of the planning, the more uncertain the cost of the project and the timelines around delivering it. The purpose of the public spending codes, the decision gate approach towards the government approvals, is to gradually develop that certainty, so that when government is asked for decision gate 3 approval, then the cost and schedule estimations are as certain as they can be, and there are baselines at which to be measured success. And it is simply the case that within the National Development Plan, you have a variety of different projects at different stages of the project lifecycle. So for some, the cost and the schedule estimation process is well developed, and for others is much less well developed. I also share the motion's wish for improved investment in our national rail network, and that's why the Department and the Minister welcomes the increased funding provided for in the National Development Plan to do that. I know there are very passionate views across all sides of the House expressed by members from all parties, and none about various proposals to further the rail network. And the Minister and I recognise the long-standing advocacy groups such as Western Track in terms of their campaigning for the reopening of the Western Rail Corridor, which was exemplified by Deputy Kenny and others. As noted in the motion earlier this year, Western Track published a report it had commissioned on the proposed reopening. I don't think it would surprise anyone to know that a report commissioned by an advocacy group advocated reopening on the line. What the government has approved is not to consider issues like the Western Rail Corridor in isolation, but instead to look at the inter-regional rail network in its entirety, and not just to consider it on the basis of the state's network, but also to look at it in the context of the entire island of Ireland. That's why we've launched a strategic rail review, and I'd encourage everyone to take part in that in consultation, which should launch very shortly. The Minister and I welcome the motion's acknowledgement that the impact of the government's measures on rural communities needs to be assessed closely. I have no doubt that the proposals will welcome the fact that this is already a requirement. All memoranda for government's decisions must provide an assessment of the impact on rural communities. Furthermore, the National Planning Framework places the concept of a balanced regional development at the very heart of everything that the government must do across all its policies and strategies. I endorse the comments earlier of my colleague, the Minister State at the Department of Transport, Minister Nocton, in relation to Connecting Ireland. I think that the initiative could potentially be transformative for public transport in rural Ireland. It will expand bus services across the country, linking local communities with those destinations that they need to access, whether that's for work, education or leisure, something that previous speakers referenced, particularly in the context of COVID. Obviously, in rural Ireland, the car will always play an integral part in people's transport needs. As we strive to meet our climate actions targets, those cars will increasingly become zero emission. And while I welcome the continued funding committed to in the National Development Plan towards the protection and renewal of our regional road network, if I could be parochial at the moment and use the context of my own county for Limerick, the government has committed to funding to improve the active travel bus and rail infrastructure that will benefit both rural and urban County Limerick for generations to come. The Limerick Greenway, Limerick Bus Connects, Connecting Limerick, Connecting Ireland and improved rail infrastructure services will be funded under the National Development Plan, and I look forward to seeing that being delivered. In conclusion, I'd like to reiterate my view that the House broadly agrees on the needs for investments in rural and regional transport services, and also states the fact that the Government has demonstrated a commitment for ongoing investment across these services. And I'd like to thank the Count Corla and the deputies for giving me the time to respond to the House on that, and I'm sharing the remainder of my time with Deputy Cleary.